small town outside of Fort Worth, Texas, a truck driver leaves home, never to return. Authorities suspect something is terribly wrong. Weeks pass as forensic investigators search for even the smallest clues, only to find what they feared in their own backyard. In Canada, 2 people die suddenly of unknown causes, and their deaths may not be as coincidental as they first appear. But a mixture of intuition and science leads detectives on a journey to uncover the deadly answers half a world away. Perpetrators try to disguise their actions to avoid prosecution. Yet forensic investigators, using advanced techniques, can uncover their crimes, revealing the silent killers. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. Graham, Texas, lies in the grasslands just west of Fort Worth. The quaint cowboy town, surrounded by cattle and horse ranches, has a down-home family feel, where picturesque scenery rarely doubles as a crime scene. On January 20th, 1996, the Young County Sheriff's Office received a call from T.J. Ryan's parents.
You need police, fire, or ambulance?
Their son was missing, and they were concerned. The 6-foot 6-inch, 300-pound, 27-year-old man had disappeared into thin air.
Wednesday. He's been missing since Wednesday.
Okay, does he have a girlfriend?
TJ's mother informed police that her son worked as a long-haul trucker transporting cattle.
She said that they had an argument.
She was worried because he had not reported to work for several days.
I don't believe that because he would have come to my house.
Young County Sheriff Kerry Pettis was the first to look into TJ's whereabouts. Sheriff Pettis knew most of the county's citizens, so he was acquainted with the easygoing trucker.
He was a good person. He was a young man that rodeoed, drove cattle trucks, helped gather cattle. He just worked around agriculture all his life. Was the same as any young person is. Always wore a big hat, always wore boots, generally speaking.
Since it was out of character for TJ to miss work without checking in, police hoped his employer might have some information about his whereabouts.
How many years?
TJ's boss told him his girlfriend, Helen Moore, had phoned a few days earlier, explaining he was too sick to come in to work.
Because he lives with his girlfriend.
So we began the process of following up. Did he have girlfriends? Did he have a drug habit? Where could he have gone?
The sheriff put out a missing persons report to the surrounding areas in hopes of some news about the missing trucker.
On Monday, we began, as word got out in the community, we began getting hundreds of calls of, well, I saw him here. I think he went there. So on and so forth. And those things had to all be run down, and it was very time-consuming.
The sheriff met with Chief Deputy Gary Barnett to discuss the case. He also called in Texas Ranger Marshall Brown, who worked for the district attorney's office handling special cases. Together, they focused on finding T.J. Ryan. Since T.J.'s boss said Helen Moore called in sick on her boyfriend's behalf, Ranger Brown and Deputy Barnett decided to pay her a visit. Helen and T.J. lived together on a small ranch, where they kept some livestock and a few horses.
Gary Barnett, Chief Deputy, Young County Sheriff's Department.
The couple had been involved for over 5 years.
Talk to us.
Sure.
Helen told the officers that she and TJ were arguing over finances.
About 4 days ago.
She said he stormed out of the house and she hadn't seen him since.
Shirt, I think.
She told Ranger Brown this wasn't the first time something like this had happened.
He always comes back, though. He'll be back.
At the house, Ranger Brown noticed what appeared to be bloodstains on the front porch. Helen became agitated and quickly explained that a stray dog had attacked their pet pot-bellied pig.
Yeah, the blood's from our pig.
The pig's wounds were so severe that he could not be saved. She asked her son to shoot it.
Where's Pig at?
Helen then told the officers that she had placed the carcass in a horse trailer.
Do you mind if we...
Ranger Brown wanted to look around inside.
I don't mind.
Would you go with us?
Sure.
Okay.
Although everything appeared to be in order, one thing caught his eye. He noticed the floor. It looked as if the carpet had been removed.
I took it out and burned it.
Helen said the carpet was one of the things she and TJ were arguing over.
He was complaining how messy the house was. What is the problem?
She said he yelled at her because the carpet was filthy and that she was a bad housekeeper. She wanted to make him happy, so she tore it up and took it outside. She explained that the carpeting was too heavy to drag to the side of the road, so she thought it would be easier to burn it.
Yeah, why don't you clean the house up once in a while?
Was there something on the carpet that you didn't want us to see?
Well, no, I don't care if y'all saw it. We had the
Helen denied any wrongdoing.
It was messy from the pig. He was complaining
She simply was
about
getting rid of some old
screaming
carpet.
about how messy the carpet was, so I just took it outside and burned it.
Investigators had come up empty at the ranch. They were no closer to finding T.J. Ryan. But that was about to change. In neighboring Palo Pinto County, a resident of the Possum Lake area called authorities. He saw what he believed to be a deer carcass shot by poachers hiding on his land. Constable Noah Bragg was dispatched to the scene. He was horrified by what he saw in the scrubby prairie grass.
1156 Palo Pinto, gonna need the sheriff and the investigator here, please. We've got human remains.
Hello?
Constable Bragg reported the torso was that of a large white male.
Okay, we'll be on our way. Be there in a minute. Marshal, we gotta go.
Barnett and Brown immediately left for the crime scene, fearing their missing person case had now become a murder. When they arrived, Palo Pinto police had already roped off the area. Investigators noticed something strange right away. There wasn't a large amount of blood around the torso. Given the severity of the dismemberment, officers speculated that the victim had most likely been killed somewhere else and then dumped in the grass. Further examination of the torso revealed even more clues. They believed whoever cut up this body knew something about anatomy. The legs and buttocks had been removed at the joint. The hands were detached at the wrists in the same manner. The victim's head and neck were also missing. Investigators noticed an abrasion around the victim's waist. Ranger Brown had several initial theories.
In a drug-related crime, they do dismember bodies to keep the body from being identified. And in this case, that's what it appeared to be in.
The torso was removed and sent to the coroner's office for an autopsy. Investigators would have to wait for DNA tests before they would know if, in fact, this was the body of T.J. Ryan. In Young County, Texas, a trucker named T.J. Ryan was reported missing. A few days later, a dismembered torso was discovered in a remote field in nearby Palo Pinto County. Investigators speculated the gruesome murder might be a result of a drug deal gone bad. And now they waited for DNA results in the hopes of making a positive identification to see if, in fact, it was the missing trucker. At the scene, investigators gathered more clues. They noticed coastal Bermuda hay, a commonly used stock feed, around the torso. Smears of manure were present, as were prickly pear needles. They collected these samples for further analysis. Texas Ranger Brown and his team found other peculiar clues.
There was a black plastic bag laying next to the torso. Also, there was a piece of wood that was found at the scene that had red paint on it, which appeared that the vehicle had ran over and maybe the paint from the vehicle was on the wood. And that was basically the physical evidence that was at the scene.
Officers noticed tire impressions in the loose soil. There were two separate and distinct sets of tire tracks. It appeared as if a truck pulling a trailer had driven up near the torso. While the soil was too powdery to obtain imprint samples, the officers documented the size and characteristics of the tire treads. They also measured the tracks to determine the turning radius of the vehicle. At the Dallas County Medical Examiner's office, the torso was processed. Pathologists made a detailed report of the victim's wounds. They determined that a knife or a fine-tooth saw was used to dismember the body. They also believed the abrasion across the victim's waist was caused by a rope. DNA samples were collected to help determine if, in fact, this was the body of T.J. Ryan. They were sent out for analysis. Investigators also sent the biological samples to the lab for further toxicology screenings in hopes of proving their drug theory. But what the lab proved shocked even the most seasoned investigators. The lab report informed Sheriff Pettis there were fatal levels of morphine in the victim's body. But no one knew whose torso they were investigating. The answer lay deep within the body's DNA, but the test results were days away. Investigators continued to search for other body parts and additional evidence. Search and rescue teams combed the surrounding areas where the torso was found. Forensic cadaver dogs, specially trained to alert on human remains, were also called in to aid in the search. Despite this effort, no further evidence was found. At the Torrent County Medical Examiner's office, senior forensic DNA analyst Carolyn Van Winkle used a reverse paternity test to make a positive identification on T.J. Ryan. Sheriff Pettis was now officially heading up a murder investigation. And he decided to go back to the last known person who saw T.J. Ryan alive, his girlfriend, Helen Moore. He needed answers. Sheriff Pettis wanted to take another look at the ranch. He was particularly interested in the blood on the porch, which Moore said came from an injured pig. Crime scene investigators took samples of the blood. Since Helen said she transported the pig in the horse trailer, Pettis moved it to the impound lot. Investigators would make a more detailed inspection at the police lab.
This is Carolyn Van.
Carolyn Van Winkle examined the blood
I
samples
have those
taken from the porch.
threshold sample for you. That blood came back to be pig blood. It wasn't human.
Van Winkle's test confirmed the sample taken from the porch was in fact from a pig. It appeared that Helen Moore was not lying. But investigators were still not convinced she was telling the whole truth. They believed she was holding back something. They just didn't know what it was. The Young County forensic team examined the truck and trailer taken from Helen's ranch. They discovered prickly pine needles embedded in the tires. Investigators collected samples in order to compare it to similar plant material found where the torso had been left. Knowing horse manure was also present near the remains, they also gathered manure samples. Inside the samples were visible specks of red that appeared to be chips of paint. They were sent to the lab for analysis. Once again, Vi Hummel Carr brought in a cadaver dog to determine if a human body was transported in the trailer.
We were requested to do an evidence search of the trailer to see if we could determine if there was any blood or tissue from the victim. I started out doing a perimeter search of the trailer with Mercy, and then we went inside the trailer where she alerted on the floorboards.
The dog confirmed what investigators were beginning to suspect.
The blood was found in the trailer boards and on the axles of the trailer. It had dripped down through the cracks in the boards and come to rest on the axles.
Investigators sent the boards to the lab to see if the blood was human or if it came from the dead pig Helen's son had placed in the trailer. Given that red paint flecks were found in the manure next to the torso, they also extracted paint samples for further analysis. The truck and trailer's turning radius was compared to the calculations taken at the crime scene. Investigators determined that Helen's truck and trailer could have been at the crime scene, but definitive proof was needed. Nothing tied her directly to the murder. Investigators went back to those closest to TJ. Sheriff Pettis looked into Helen Moore's finances.
Okay, let me see. Hey, Gary, come here and look at this.
The most alarming piece of information was the fact that Helen Moore had recently taken out a $150,000 insurance policy on the life of her boyfriend, TJ Ryan.
Nobody has that kind of claim system.
Investigators now believed they were closer to a suspect.
There's your motive.
If they ever hoped to make an arrest, they needed the science to back up their suspicions. At the forensic lab, Dr. Tam Garland examined the paint scrapings taken from the floorboards of the trailer. They compared these to the red paint flecks embedded in the manure where the torso had been found.
We have found what we believe are red paint chips inside the fecal pads. And so he actually retrieved paint chips from the trailer for us, and we could lay them side by side and match up the different colors. You could match up the colors layer for layer in the chips that he sent us as well as in the chips that we found from the cows. So in our mind, that's pretty much reduces the probability that it's from any other trailer or from any other source.
Dr. Garland determined the cow had eaten the paint chips found in the grass and passed them. Helen's trailer had been at the scene. Forensic examiner Carolyn Van Winkle extracted blood samples from the trailer floorboards. Her analysis revealed the presence of two distinct blood types.
In the trailer, there was samples obtained from the floorboards of the trailer and samples obtained from under those floorboards in the axle of the trailer. Those samples were submitted to the laboratory, and on each one of those samples, human blood was identified, and also pig blood was identified.
Further DNA analysis confirmed that the human blood belonged to T.J. Ryan. Sheriff Pettis now had definitive proof that the trailer on Helen Moore's property had transported Ryan's body. He had the evidence he needed to secure an arrest warrant. Helen Moore was arrested and charged with murder. But Sheriff Pettis still needed corroborating evidence that would confirm exactly what had happened. He obtained a search warrant, and his team began a detailed examination of Helen and TJ's ranch house. Investigators used luminol testing to check for blood. It became quickly apparent that Moore had used bleach to scrub the house, erasing any residual surface stains. Any evidence that placed the murder in her home appeared to be gone. Yet when a cadaver dog was brought in, it alerted on evidence the luminol testing could not pick up. This just might be the link detectives needed that would firmly establish where and how the murder took place.
Yeah, I'll see what you got here.
Detectives in Young County, Texas had apprehended Helen Moore, charging her with the murder of her boyfriend, T.J. Ryan. His torso had been found in a remote area, and forensic investigators learned he had toxic levels of morphine in his system. Police discovered T.J.'s blood in a horse trailer found on Moore's property. Detectives believed Moore had scrubbed her house with bleach, and luminol testing could not reveal exactly where the murder took place. Once again, Vi Hummel Carr brought in a cadaver dog to help find what investigators were looking for.
Inside the Moore residence, Mercy alerted on blood evidence by the rear door, where apparently the body had been dragged through the house. She trailed from the master bedroom through the hallway and into the boys' room, just the way the body had been dragged through the house.
The dog had sensed something underneath a carpet threshold strip. Investigators removed the carpet strip to examine it further in the lab. Inside the residence, they also found prescription bottles of morphine. Pettis learned later that Helen's former husband had cancer. The drug had been prescribed as a painkiller. At the lab, the blood samples taken from the carpet strip were analyzed. The blood was T.J. Ryan's. Sheriff Pettis was now convinced Helen Moore murdered T.J. Ryan inside their home for the insurance money. He confronted her with a possible motive.
She was wanting to purchase another horse and wanted to borrow the money again to do this, and he said no. And I think that may have been the trigger that really set her off. I think she was probably going to do it all along, but I think that set her off.
But Helen admitted nothing. Finally, Pettis showed her the evidence his team had collected. He told her that given these irrefutable facts, the district attorney would seek the death penalty. Realizing her crime had been revealed, Helen Moore told the sheriff what had transpired that fateful night. TJ complained of back pain, and Helen suggested he take some morphine. She gave him a lethal dose. With her kids away at school, Helen proceeded to get rid of the body. But because TJ was over 300 pounds, it would be impossible for her to drag him outside by herself. So she wrapped a lariat around his waist and attached it to the hitch on her pickup. She then proceeded to pull the body out of the house and up into the trailer. Moore, who had experienced butchering animals, then cut up the body in the trailer and discarded the parts over 3 counties. Helen Moore was convicted of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison and will not be eligible for parole for 30 years. Some find their prey and methods of murder close to home. Other perpetrators travel far and wide to uncover the perfect silent killer. Hamilton, Ontario sits on the northern shores of Lake Ontario. This Canadian city is home to an international population. And in 1996, authorities would discover an exotic method of murder. John Pierce, an insurance investigator, went to the home of Natraj Sukhwinder, a native of India. Pierce needed some additional information to process a recent life insurance claim. As he got out of his car, Pierce felt as if he'd been at this location before. Ranjit Kela, his client, had died a few weeks ago of a heart attack and named Mr. Sukhwinder the beneficiary of his $100,000 life insurance policy.
Hello. Sir. Yes, I'm John Pierce. I'm the insurance.
Both men purchased policies naming the other as beneficiary in the event of their deaths.
Thank you. This way, sir. Yes, sir. I'd like to ask you a few
Sukhwinder told the agent that Ranjit was his nephew and that the young man had lived with him. Pierce was confused. Ranjit's driver's license listed a different address.
Oh, he's my nephew.
Sukhwinder explained that the address was his brother's and that his nephew spent time at both houses. Pierce left the documents with Sukhwinder, who said his brother was in India and he would have him clear up any discrepancies once he returned. As Pierce drove away, something about the case still bothered him. Back at his office, Pierce asked his assistant to pull Sukhwinder's file. As he went through the information, Pierce remembered Sukhwinder had filed another life insurance claim only 16 months earlier. The claim was for Sukhwinder's wife, Priya. She too had died suddenly. Instinctively, he called the Hamilton police. Detective Warren Corral was the lead investigator. Kevin Dinsa, a native of India who spoke fluent Punjabi, was also assigned to the case.
I've interviewed the beneficiary.
The fact that two claims were filed in such a relatively short period of time and were purchased by the same individual raised serious concerns.
I understand that you represent two separate insurance.
Detective Corral was very suspicious.
That's why I contacted you.
Both of the people that died had similar symptomology to their deaths. They were young people who had no medical history.
The report indicated that Priya had complained of headaches for several weeks before her death. She was taking a homeopathic remedy to help alleviate the pain. One day, she suddenly collapsed. Her husband, Natraj Sukhwinder, found her and immediately called 911. Doctors could not revive her, and she lapsed into a coma.
Do you really want to go through with this?
4 days later, at her husband's request, her life support was removed, and she died. Dr. David King performed the autopsy on Priya. He was somewhat puzzled by what he found.
Post-mortem showed really a swollen brain of brain death. And that was about the only significant finding at post-mortem. There was no actual indication of why she had collapsed, no underlying disease process that I could identify at that time.
The hospital drug screen found no trace of street drugs. Cause of death was ruled undetermined. Sukhwinder had his wife's remains cremated and sent back to India. Unfortunately, the autopsy did not provide the answers Detective Corral had hoped for. He decided to look into Sukhwinder's past. A search in the Canadian criminal database revealed that Sukhwinder was arrested for domestic violence. He had hit Priya. He paid a fine and was released. Detectives Corral and Dinsa decided to look into Sukhwinder's nephew's death. They began by visiting Ranjit's widow to ask about the night her husband died. She explained that Ranjit had friends over that day, including his uncle, Sukhwinder. Ranjit's friends were partying and drinking heavily. But his wife told the detectives Ranjit never drank alcohol, and this night was no exception.
He drank.
She remembered when the guests left, he had complained of a backache and took some pills to alleviate the pain. As he was getting ready for bed, he collapsed. She said she called an ambulance as her husband convulsed on the floor.
Hello?
Ranjit died in the emergency room. The official cause of death? Heart failure.
Well, thank you for the information.
Although his death was ruled a heart attack, Ranjit, like Priya, the first victim, had experienced severe pain, taken medicine, and collapsed on the floor. The detectives went to see Dr. King at Hamilton General. Dr. King's colleague, Dr. Chitra Rao, overheard the detectives' questions and had particular concerns of her own, given the peculiar cause of death.
We discussed the case, and then he asked me whether I had any suggestion. So then I realized, since both are Indian origin, and I know three common poisonings in India is strychnine, arsenic, and chloroform. So I said maybe we should test for those three agents.
Detective Corral wondered if, in fact, the victims had been given the deadly poison.
Now, these are the
Dr. King, the forensic pathologist who performed the autopsies, gave Detective Coral the tissue samples from the two victims, Priya Sukhwinder and Ranjit Kela.
Is there anything else?
Coral delivered these to the Center of Forensic Science for further toxicology testing. But they would have to wait for the results. It took time. Given Dr. Rao's concerns, Coral began researching strychnine poisoning. He learned that the plant it comes from is indigenous to India. Because it is used as a pesticide and a homeopathic medicine, the substance is readily available. The toxic chemical is lethal and is banned in Canada. A small amount, 1/40th of a sugar cube, is enough to cause a horrific death.
It's just a terrible, terrible death. You're conscious while this goes on, while you're in these seizures, these state of seizures, and you basically know that there's impending doom. People that have ingested strychnine will say, "I'm going to die, I'm going to die."
Yeah, I'm Warren Coral.
The detectives went to visit the friend who was drinking with Ranjit and Sukhwinder.
We're investigating the... yeah.
Although he said he noticed nothing unusual the night Ranjit died, he did remember Sukhwinder gave his nephew a pill for his back pain. He then told the officers he heard a rumor that Sukhwinder went back to India after his wife Priya died and remarried there.
I haven't seen it.
And there was one more startling revelation.
Something is funny because...
He also heard his new wife suddenly died, just like Ranjit and Priya. The friend believed Sukhwinder had collected on insurance for this wife as well. 3 people were dead, and a pattern was beginning to emerge. In Hamilton, Ontario, 2 young Indian immigrants died suddenly for no apparent reason. The only link between them, one man, Natraj Sukhwinder, the sole beneficiary of life insurance policies taken out on both victims.
Let me ask you this.
And although there were rumors surrounding Sukhwinder, there was no evidence of any kind.
That's my brother's address.
The one solid lead was the toxicology screenings of the second victim, Ranjit Kela. The presence of a lethal poison, strychnine, was discovered. And although illegal in both the US and Canada, the substance is readily available in Sukhwinder's native India. At the Center of Forensic Science, Dr. Joel Mayer examined the samples taken from both victims. Dr. King had saved blood samples from Ranjit. But because Priya had died nearly 18 months earlier, no blood remained, just small blocks of tissue. Due to the limitations of his equipment, Dr. Mayer could not detect the presence of strychnine in Priya's samples. However, he did find evidence of strychnine in Ranjit's blood sample. While Hamilton investigators now believed the young man was poisoned, proving it was another matter. And linking it to the death of Sukhwinder's wife Priya was nearly impossible. They were convinced they had a killer who could strike again at any moment, and they had hit a dead end, fearful they wouldn't be able to stop him. Given the discovery of the poison, Detectives Coral and Dinsa decided to question Sukhwinder further. The used car dealer was cooperative at first, until they asked him if he had ever heard of the poison strychnine.
Death of Ranjit Kela.
Warren spoke to him in English, and it became progressively worse when some key questions were being asked of him. And that's when I stepped up and told him that I could speak Punjabi and that we could then speak in his mother tongue. And I don't think he was quite prepared for that because he kind of got boxed in with that. And so when I was able to converse, he didn't have much room to back away from the questions at that point.
We're going to come back and chat with him.
Although Sukhwinder said he visited with Ranjit the night he died, he insisted he never gave him a pill for his back pain. When they asked him about his wife, Priya, Sukhwinder became sad.
I want you to think about the questions we've asked. I'll talk to you.
But detectives did not believe his display of emotion was genuine. His evasive answers only heightened their suspicions. But that alone was not enough evidence to hold him. The detectives wanted to check out the rumors surrounding Sukhwinder.
It's about a 10.
For that, they needed to go halfway around the world.
Call and see if he's awake.
Sure.
Coral and Dinsa placed a call to Pierre Carrier, the liaison officer at the Canadian High Commission in New Delhi, asking for information on Sukhwinder's background.
Yes, I am. How were you able to follow up those?
Pierre Carrier sent them a fax from Interpol. The rumors proved to be true. Sukhwinder's past was alarming.
What did he say?
He did remarry, and his new wife died suddenly, just like his first wife, Priya. They also learned he had 2 sons who died mysteriously shortly after they were born. It was possible that Sukhwinder had not only killed another wife, but had also murdered his 2 infant sons as well.
February 16th, 1996.
Kind of confirms that information.
The trip to India also confirmed Sukhwinder had easy access to strychnine, the poison found in his nephew's blood. Dinsa and Coral felt it was imperative that they travel to India to collect more corroborating evidence concerning his other family's death.
We wanted to determine what the cause of the death was and what the circumstances were. We also learned that the second wife that he had married in India gave birth to twin babies who had also died. So we wanted to determine what their cause of death was and what the circumstances were, and what the connection was with all these deaths and marriages that were occurring immediately after the first wife's death.
They learned that the symptoms of the new wife's death were identical to those of Priya and Ranjit's. The detectives also discovered how easy it was to buy strychnine.
Strychnine is indigenous to India. It's a tree called kapilo tree, and it grows in the northeastern part of India, and it's available readily, and mainly used for homeopathic reasons, but it's also available in its raw form, and sometimes it's used to kill animals, so it's quite readily available at some of the organic stores and homeopathic stores in India.
In order to get a conviction in Priya's case, Coral and Dinsa would need definitive proof that the poison was present in her tissue samples. It was their hope that forensic science would provide the link they were missing. Hamilton, Ontario detectives Coral and Dinsa were deep into the investigations of 5 mysterious deaths. They discovered strychnine in the blood of one of the victims and believed the others were poisoned as well. It seemed all the evidence was pointing to one suspect, Natraj Sukhwinder, but linking him to the deadly substance proved difficult. The detectives contacted world-renowned Dr. Frederick Reeders, a Pennsylvania-based toxicologist who had advanced equipment calibrated to detect the most minute trace elements. Working with only the small tissue block sample obtained from Suckwinder's wife, Priya, Reeders began a painstaking process. Using this method, Reeder was able to determine that a large amount of strychnine was in Priya's system at the time of her death. Coral and Dinsa now had the proof they needed to arrest Suckwinder for the murders of his nephew and his wife. Despite hours of interrogation, Suckwinder continued to maintain innocence.
He gave a caution statement again, stating he continued to say that he did not murder these people. He did not murder his first wife. He did not murder Ranjit. The things that were happening in India were all a coincidence.
Coral and Dinsa obtained a search warrant for his house. They discovered several items that supported the case they had pieced together.
Found something here.
They were hoping to find something more substantial to tie him directly to the strychnine.
The search warrant was for strychnine or any literature related to strychnine, and we didn't find either. But what we did find was some mortar and pestles, which wasn't all that uncommon in Indian homes as spices are being ground for their daily consumption. However, it was our theory that raw strychnine, which comes in round brown pestles, was grounded in these mortar and pestles and then either placed in gelatin capsules and given to the victims.
The detectives submitted the evidence they collected to test for the poison. Yet Suckwinder had covered his tracks. Dr. Mayer found no trace of strychnine. But the fact that these items were in his home, coupled with the other evidence they had compiled, gave the detectives a clear picture of how he carried out the crimes. Suckwinder knew his wife was taking medication for her headaches. He ground up the strychnine in the mortar and pestle, then replaced the contents of her capsules with the deadly poison. He had also offered Ranjit a remedy for his back. Little did the man know the pills he took were laced with strychnine. In July of 2001, Suckwinder was convicted of the murder of his wife. He received a life sentence. Later that year, he received an additional life term for the murder of Ranjit Kela.
It was an exhilarating experience. It was a tough fight, and once it was over, it was a very, very big victory for us, and it was a relief. Because of the problems that I briefly outlined, it was a problem throughout the investigation, throughout the trial. So once we got the conviction, it was a huge relief. Of course, after the second conviction, we were just exhilarated about the whole thing.
Though it may only take a small amount of poison to kill, these toxic chemicals leave a telltale trail only forensic science can trace. And with it, the silent killers come to light, and their heinous crimes become all too clear. An abandoned car outside Philadelphia brings heartbreak to a family and terror to a community. A young woman is dead, The killer gone. But the marks of his passage remain. South of Chicago, another mystery. A missing boy. A frantic search. Heartbreaking clues. Investigators struggle to find the boy and whoever took him. When victims are young, crime hurts that much more. And when the criminals are repeat offenders, it's a cruel turn of fate. Authorities are dedicated to solving these crimes and terminating the careers of those who are out to kill. At about 2 a.m. on June 20th, 1996, an off-duty ambulance crewman spotted a car abandoned on the road. It was parked on an exit ramp off Interstate 476, heading west away from Philadelphia. The car was running, and the headlights and radio were on. But no one was inside. The driver radioed 911. The emergency operator took the report, then dispatched 2 nearby troopers to the scene.
We'll send a trooper out to the scene as soon as possible.
State Police Lieutenant Lenny Bandy was notified and headed to the highway interchange.
When the car was discovered, it was found with its driver's door open, the headlights were on, the radio was playing, and the engine was running. That was unusual to me.
It looked like a crime. The State Police Forensic Services Unit, headed by Corporal Alan Stewart, arrived at the scene.
Well, there was blood in front of the vehicle, and at that point I knew it was urgent to get everything started as quickly as possible.
At the front of the car was a tire iron. Near it, a small pool that appeared to be blood.
It was more than just an abandoned vehicle to me at that point. And it was a missing person investigation. It certainly was under suspicious circumstances with the presence of the tire iron and blood in front of the car and the hasty manner in which it appeared the occupant had left.
We collected the blood with the Q-tip, packaged it, we sent that out to the lab for DNA purposes.
Careful not to upset any potential evidence, they searched the car's interior and found a backpack. It appeared to be a college student's, but there was no identification inside. The car was registered to a woman in Brookhaven, Pennsylvania. Investigators learned the car was driven by her 22-year-old daughter, Amy.
1974.
While troopers spoke with Amy's parents, the crime scene processing continued.
One of the troopers had seen a pair of panties and shoes laying on a hillside. We went back to retrieve the pair of panties and shoes at that location.
Amy's mother later identified the shoes as her daughter's. It was looking more and more like a forcible abduction. Next to the clothing, troopers spotted a distinct tire impression, which was photographed.
Upon completion of the photographs, then we used dental stone to cast the tire impression.
The impression was sent to the crime lab. Amy's parents were worried. They knew the effects of crime firsthand.
Her father was a police officer. Her mother was an emergency room nurse. We wanted to do everything in our power to bring this young girl home safely to her family.
They had been out of town and hadn't seen their daughter in several days, but knew that Amy had planned to go out with friends that night. Her parents gave a description of their 22-year-old daughter, including the tattoo on her ankle.
you don't mind, I'd like to keep this picture so I can distribute it.
Do you want others?
As the APB went out for the missing college student, the Philadelphia area press jumped on the story.
She'll be right up for you, sir.
By morning, the media coverage brought forward Amy's friends, who had been with her the night before.
We were trying to retrace Amy's whereabouts, reconstruct her activities from the time that she was last heard from to the time that her car was found.
All of Amy's friends had the same story. It was an impromptu reunion of high school friends. They talked for a few hours, catching up. Friends said when Amy left the bar around 1:30 a.m., she was alone. No one had seen or heard from her since.
Tell me what happened.
At Delaware County's Criminal Investigation Division, Detective Sergeant Greg Seltzer and Detective Charles List were shocked to hear their friend's daughter was missing.
I've known Paul for a number of years. I know Amy's mother, so we wanted to do anything we could to help with the investigation.
Detective Sergeant Seltzer contacted their superior, who immediately put them on the case.
I went to the captain, who was the chief of county detectives, and explained to him that we have a police officer's daughter that's been missing.
While search teams looked for Amy, a task force gathered at the state police barracks to plan the intense investigation.
We utilized what's known as victimology. We wanted to learn about Amy and her behaviors and the patterns of her conduct. We learned that she was a regular kid.
Amy Willard was a star athlete at George Mason University, a responsible student taking summer classes, no ties to anything or anyone dangerous. By 5 p.m., 15 hours had passed with no sign of the missing girl.
While we were in the meeting, they received a call from Philadelphia police that they had a body and it matched the description of Amy.
Children had discovered the nude body that afternoon in an isolated area of North Philadelphia. It was 25 miles from Amy's car. There was no purse or clothing on or near the body, but everyone knew who it was.
That's Amy.
The physical characteristics, the size, the height and weight, it was consistent with the description given to us by Amy's family, and most specifically the presence of a tattoo on her right ankle, which was consistent with the tattoo that Amy had.
Finding Amy this way was difficult for everyone involved. Before the autopsy, her parents confirmed their daughter's identity. The medical examiner determined the young woman had died of multiple blunt force trauma to the head and body. It was a vicious attack.
When we were at the autopsy, we noticed there was a pattern on her right side that was in the shape of squares with X's in the middle of the squares that were actually burned into her right side.
The burn pattern was so distinctive, investigators believed if they could find its source, they could find the killer. The medical examiner also recovered semen and believed the victim was sexually assaulted. The fluid and samples of Amy's blood were sent to the lab for testing. At the Pennsylvania State Police Regional Crime Lab in Lima, experts determined the blood found near the car was Amy Willard's. The seminal fluid recovered from the victim was also analyzed. Using a technique known as PCR, examiners made millions of copies of an isolated DNA strand until it was large enough to decipher. Once they could read it, they put together a genetic profile of the possible assailant. But they got no hits on any DNA database. Still, it was crucial evidence, according to Delaware County Assistant District Attorney Dan McDevitt.
We had the genetic profile of the killer. We just didn't have a name to go along with that profile.
They also believed they had his tire print. Lieutenant Dennis Luce, commander of training and technical support at the crime lab, examined the tire cast.
The cast that we were looking at was a tire that had 4 grooves and 5 raised areas. So when we did our search of the database, we were only looking at tires that had the same number of grooves. We determined from the database that it was a Firestone FR440 tire.
Although it was a common tire, it might help confirm or eliminate a suspect. Investigators also needed to examine the burn pattern from the victim's body.
We believe if we could find the source of that pattern injury, we could find out who the killer was.
From the burn pattern, a pathologist tried to determine the shape and dimensions of the object that made it.
Although he couldn't tell us what the object was, he drew a picture of what the object looked like.
The investigative team had a great deal of evidence: the burn pattern, the tire track, and the genetic profile of the killer. But they had no idea who he was. Knowing why Amy stopped her car might help identify the killer.
I have no idea.
Both Mom and Dad assured us the only reason she would stop if a police officer had pulled her over.
A police impersonator, a frightening possibility, but a real one. As the first few crucial days of the investigation passed with no solid leads, the law enforcement community grew frustrated.
It was a virtual whodunit. It was a needle in a haystack.
A vicious killer had stolen the life of this well-loved young woman, the daughter of a cop and a nurse, one of their own. And the investigators of Delaware County would never give up until they found him. In Delaware County, Pennsylvania, state police and county detectives were investigating the brutal homicide of 22-year-old college student Amy Willard. Many knew Amy, the daughter of a local police officer and a nurse. Investigators had good physical evidence, including a distinctive burn pattern on the body and the DNA profile of the suspected killer, but no suspects. One theory is that Amy stopped that night because someone impersonating a cop made her pull over. Detective Charles List sought information on known police impersonators.
I was surprised at how many police impersonators there were out there. We had a lot of interviews to do.
Many of those interviewed had solid alibis. But not everyone did.
No, I do not own a black Honda.
One suspect had a record of trying to pull over women.
You weren't on Route 1 at the entrance to Route 1?
Investigators could not corroborate his alibi for the night Amy was killed. And he worked near the place where the body was found. Detectives got a search warrant that allowed them to take a sample of the suspect's blood to compare his DNA against the DNA collected from the victim. State Police Lieutenant Lenny Bandy knew the genetic material was their greatest ally.
That was the most conclusive piece of evidence that we can use to include or exclude someone in our investigation.
The sample was sent to the lab for processing.
Yes.
The suspect in question also drove a car that could support the type of tire that left the impression near Amy's clothing. Examiners compared the tire cast from the scene to an inked impression of the suspect's tires. But reported no match. DNA experts eventually reported similar results. No match. The suspect was cleared.
There were numerous calls, tips that were made by the public. We were overwhelmed early on.
Despite checking every lead, they came up with nothing. Months passed. Frustration grew. Detective Charles List and Detective Sergeant Greg Seltzer eliminated every known police impersonator. They had no idea why Amy pulled off the road. Then, late on the night of May 29, 1997, almost a year after Amy Willard's death, 19-year-old nursing student Patty Jordan had just left a nightclub in Philadelphia and was driving home.
I noticed that a car was coming behind me with their headlights speeding up behind me. So I just kept my eye on him, and I switched lanes, and then he switched lanes with me, and then I did it again, and so did he, and I sped up, and so did he. I slowed down, and so did he.
The daughter of a Philadelphia police officer, Patty knew she needed to find her father.
I thought to myself, I was going to the 2nd police district. That's the police district by my house. And then I would just pull in there and call my dad.
Off the interstate, she stopped at a red light.
And that's when he just slowly came up from behind me. I could see him, I could see his headlights, and I thought to myself, this guy's gonna hit my car. And that's when he hit my car. And then that's when I was like, oh my God, what is this guy doing? He kept motioning for me to pull over and pull over, just to pull over. I was mad and I was scared.
But Patty Jordan was not going to pull over.
And I just thought, I'm getting this guy's plate number. I'm going to tell my dad.
Eventually, the man turned and drove away, but not before Patty got the plate.
I said it over and over in my head, and as soon as I came home and saw my brother, I ran to the kitchen and wrote it down.
Sergeant John Jordan is Patty's father.
The murder of Amy Willard had been in the news, so I entered the tag into the National Crime Information Center, NCIC, and it came back to an Arthur Bomar. And I noticed that the registration was to a Ford Escort.
But Patty said the man was driving a Honda. Sergeant Jordan also found out that Arthur Bomar was a convicted murderer who was wanted for a parole violation in Nevada.
And the more I thought about that and what had happened to my daughter, I just had to call Delaware County. Detective Sergeant Seltzer and his partner, Detective Charlie List, spoke to my daughter. And I could see the look on their face. I'll never forget the look on both their faces as they listened to Patty recount what happened to her.
Patty's description of the driver who bumped her matched that of Arthur Bomar.
Can you tell us what happened?
Although the plate was registered to a Ford Escort, Patty said she was sure it was a dark-colored Honda behind her.
I-95, and that's when I noticed that
The plate might have been switched. It was their best lead by far.
It was the entire case. It was the entire case. There was nothing, I can't describe how important that was. Just for her to grab that tag number and tell us. We wanted very much to speak with Mr. Bomar.
At first, they could not find the parolee. But after such a long and frustrating investigation, the investigators were surprised at how quickly the case took off.
We were a year into the investigation and following up every lead we could. Arthur Bomar comes into the picture within 3 days. Arthur Bomar is in custody.
Detective Sergeant Seltzer and Detective List went to interview Bomar at the Lower Marion Police Station, where he was being held on burglary charges. Bomar denied knowing anything about Amy Willard and said he had never been to the part of North Philadelphia where her body was found.
And you're still saying that you were...
He admitted he'd been to the bar Amy went to the night of her murder, but claimed he was not there that night. He was at a birthday party.
All right, Mr. Bomar.
After speaking with family members, we found that it was a lie, that he wasn't at the birthday party.
Securing a search warrant, investigators took samples of Bomar's cheek cells and hair to compare his DNA to the DNA recovered from the victim. The analysis at the busy State Police Crime Lab would take a few days. But because Bomar was in jail on another charge, Assistant District Attorney Dan McDevitt knew they had time.
Okay, Charlie.
a Montgomery County judge denied Bomar bail.
So there was no chance of him being back out on the street before we concluded our investigation. We had a lot of forensic evidence, and we wanted to carefully put all that evidence together because we only get one shot at him in court, and we wanted to make it a good one.
Police searched the area near where Bomar was arrested for burglary. Officers found a car with the same plate numbers Patty Jordan had given to her father. The plate was registered to a Ford Escort, but it was on a black Honda, just as Patty described. Technicians later found no evidence in the Honda related to the Amy Willard case. They needed to find that Escort. The case was heating up, but mysteries remained. The missing car, the peculiar burn pattern, and whether or not DNA would clear this suspect. After a year-long search, the investigators of Delaware County hoped they could solve these mysteries and find some degree of justice for a murdered young woman. Near Philadelphia, 22-year-old Amy Willard was abducted, sexually assaulted, and killed, left with a distinct burn pattern on the side of her body. A year later, Pennsylvania investigators had a suspect in custody. Arthur Bomar said he had nothing to do with Amy's death and claimed he wasn't at the bar where Amy was last seen alive. But detectives tracked down Bomar's girlfriend, and she had a different story. She was in hiding and fearful of Bomar. She said Bomar told her he was going to the bar in question on the night of the murder.
He started talking about.
Bomar confessed to his girlfriend that he watched Amy Willard leave the bar and followed her. He forced her to pull over, though the girlfriend didn't know how. Bomar said he then knocked Amy unconscious. He took her to North Philadelphia, where he raped and killed her. The girlfriend said Bomar was driving his Ford Escort that night. The statement of the girlfriend was a major break, but investigators needed evidence to back it up in court. Delaware County Detective Charles List and Detective Sergeant Greg Seltzer believed the key was Bomar's Ford Escort.
His vehicle is very important because at some point Amy was in that car.
Absolutely.
We went to an insurance company and found they had been in an accident shortly after Amy's abduction.
The detectives learned the car was towed to a salvage lot.
We obtained a search warrant. We were hoping to find some type of blood, hair, fiber that would link Amy Willard to Arthur Bomar.
When the tow truck lifted the car, investigators were stunned. The oil pan had a familiar pattern. They believed it was the object that burned Amy's body. At the State Police garage, the Forensic Services Unit processed the car.
What's that?
On the passenger side door panel, they found what appeared to be dried blood.
I'll take it down to the lab.
They removed the oil pan so it could be compared to photos of the burn pattern on the victim's body.
That's it.
The technicians also collected the car's tires to check them against the tire impression from the scene of the abduction. Corporal Alan Stewart was part of the Forensic Services Unit.
We sent the oil pan to a pattern expert from the Armed Services, who then in fact did match the oil pan to the pattern that was on Amy's body.
Lieutenant Dennis Luce compared the tire cast from the crime scene to the print of a Firestone FR 440 tire from Bomar's car.
We were able to determine by comparing the track to the suspect tire that both had the same amount of wear.
Sergeant Luce, I finished looking at that tire track that you sent in, that tire you sent in. It's consistent with the track from the crime scene.
Serology expert Cecilia Cassiola examined the door panel and found Amy Willard's blood.
Finding the victim's blood in the suspect's car puts the victim in the suspect's car.
But the most important forensic evidence came with the DNA results. It was a match. Assistant District Attorney Dan McDevitt.
The DNA evidence was irrefutable here. There was a 5 billion to 1 chance that Arthur Bomar was not the person who contributed the DNA found during the autopsy. So that obviously was the foundation of our case. In addition, we were able to link the car he drove to the thermal injury on Amy's body. Amy's blood was found behind the door panel in his car. The tires on Arthur Bomar's car left tire track impressions at the abduction scene.
It was enough to convince the jury. On October 1st, 1998, Arthur Bomar was convicted of first-degree murder, rape, and kidnapping. He was sentenced to death. Amy's family has fought for the laws to be changed to keep offenders behind bars, but the law did not pass in time to protect an Illinois family. Aroma Park is an hour south of Chicago. On an afternoon in 1995, Micah Moulton got nervous when her 10-year-old son Christopher did not come home from fishing at 5 o'clock as expected. It was not long before she had a feeling something was terribly wrong.
I jumped up and I looked at the clock. It said 5:22. And I knew immediately I needed to go find him. I had to go find him at that moment.
Leaving her other kids at the house in case Christopher returned, she went down to the Aroma Park boat ramp on the Kankakee River, where Christopher normally fished.
I walked around the area, I called his name, started yelling out for him.
After more than an hour of searching, Micah called the Kankakee County Sheriff's Department. Under Sheriff Brad O'Keefe worried when he heard where the boy was last seen.
The speed of that river, we have a lot of drownings, a lot of people falling and disappearing in that river, so that makes it dangerous in itself.
Rich, not a Aroma Park Boat Club right away. You got a missing 10-year-old.
Micah told Deputy Rich Burns about Christopher. She had already checked with all of his friends. No one had seen him since 4:30 at the boat launch.
It was very unusual for him to do this, for him not to return home on time, and we knew it was very important to get the ball rolling, to get the search started.
He's 10 years old.
And I said, well, I'm going to go in the woods and look for him. He said, just wait. He said, hold on. And he made a couple of radio calls, and the next thing I knew, there were search dogs and search teams and the fire department out there.
We didn't know if he had fallen into the river or if he had walked off, if he was just lost.
Right away, they threw every resource into the search.
All the local police agencies sent people. So we had fire departments from Aroma Park and Kankakee. They had the boats in the water doing the search. Once they knew what we were looking for, a lot of the citizens came up and volunteered.
They briefed the search parties, describing Christopher, his clothing, his bicycle. The searchers were instructed not to touch anything they found.
We don't know what happened at this point.
Any evidence should be collected by trained evidence technicians.
Anything you find, call Detective Bertrand. We're going to process it and handle it as evidence. Detective Bertrand will come out and collect it. All right? So everybody go
They had to
line up
organize
along these woods.
and stay organized.
They have an assistant in the command center who keeps track of who's where and who's doing what searches.
Fire department personnel checked the water and riverbanks. Search dogs tried to track the young boy. Everyone prayed they would find Christopher quickly. Investigators interviewed anyone they could locate at the boat launch.
Sit over there. Did you see Christopher Meyer? Yes, ma'am. What did you guys see? Tell me everything you saw.
Two boys said they saw Chris with a man that afternoon, according to Kankakee County Administrative Chief Joe Mulcahy.
The man had a fishing tackle box with him, and in the box was some lures that were not appropriate for this area. It was saltwater lures, and the man did tell them that he was originally from this area, but had just came back from Florida.
The boys said there was a fillet knife in the box with the lures. They saw Christopher and the man leave the riverbank together. They could give only a vague description. A white male, tall, a mustache.
He had like all this neat stuff.
And we were concerned that there may be a possible abduction at that point.
No one slept.
We had detectives in here fielding calls all night. We had people searching the woods. We searched that woods 20 times, hoping that we would find something.
But that night, they didn't. Local news stations ran the story, broadcasting descriptions of Christopher and the unknown man he was seen with, and asking for more help. At the Sheriff's Emergency Operations Center, deputies and volunteers fielded calls. Many were tips suggesting they look into certain men as possible suspects. Investigators followed up on every tip, while the search continued, firemen dragging the river bottom. More than 18 hours had passed with no sign of Christopher. Then, the next morning, searchers spotted something in the water. A child's sneaker. Micah identified it as Christopher's.
We now have a shoe in the water. Chances are better now that he's in the water or something's there, so we've got to intensify the search there.
Dive teams searched for any sign of the boy or his bike.
It would overhear people talking about, you know, any news, did they find a body? And a couple of times I lost it and said there's not going to be a body, they're going to bring home Christopher. And I just kept a positive outlook on it, because I couldn't ever let myself think or feel that he wasn't going to come home.
Those searching for Christopher would not give up either. That little boy was out there somewhere, and they needed to bring him home. 10-year-old Christopher Meyer was last seen with an unknown man near the Kankakee River in Aroma Park, Illinois. Investigators did not know if Christopher had been abducted or if he fell in the river where they had recovered one of the boy's sneakers. Micah Moulton is Christopher's mother.
I felt there would be, everything was going to be okay, or eventually I was going to wake up, that this was just a really bad dream.
But it was no dream.
I got something here.
On the second day, one search team spotted something. Christopher's bicycle. It appeared someone had carried the bike deep into the woods and tried to conceal it, according to Undersheriff Brad O'Keefe.
It's that much more critical. We're not searching anymore for a lost child. We're not searching anymore for a drowned child.
Now they knew someone had taken Christopher. Several witnesses said they saw Christopher pushing his bike with a white male who had a goatee. They said at one point the man was standing by the open trunk of a gray four-door sedan that had fishing rods in the back window.
Just a short.
He had a fillet knife in a leather case in his back pocket. Some of the witnesses worked with a police artist to create a composite sketch of the man.
Great.
Investigators released the sketch to the media.
Once the picture was out, everybody had somebody in mind. So we were getting all kinds of tips, and clues on who it might be.
Deputies followed up with every caller to the tip line.
We took a composite sketch and asked them to look at it and identify it.
Yeah, that's Bus.
One name came up more than any other, Timothy Buss.
When was the last time you saw him?
Fairly new to the community, Micah Moulton did not know the name.
No, we just need to ask him.
And I remember somebody coming in and saying, Timothy Buss, oh my God, I can't believe he's out. And they kept going on, and I said, who is, like, Timothy Buss? Who is this Tim Buss? Who is this Timothy Buss? And nobody would tell me.
The investigators all knew Buss. In 1981, Timothy Buss had abducted and murdered a 5-year-old girl in nearby Bradley, Illinois. He was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years. But he had been recently paroled. Lieutenant Larry Osenga of the Kankakee City Police Department's Violent Crimes Task Force offered his squad's assistance. They asked around Buss's old neighborhood.
The neighbors advised us, yes, he was in the community.
Kankakee police learned Buss was now living in Joliet, Illinois, a western suburb of Chicago. Lieutenant Osenga called Joliet Police Department. Joliet agreed to check on Buss's apartment.
So Joliet assisted us. We went to where his residence was. He was not there at the time.
But the Joliet police sat and waited. The searches in the Aroma Park area kept on as another terrible night passed. Then, 2 days after Christopher disappeared, the Joliet surveillance unit spotted a man approaching Buss's apartment. It looked like the suspect. He was alone. Joliet contacted the Kankakee officers, who immediately drove up to the city.
You been surveilling the place? Yeah, for about an hour now. You see him go anywhere? Sure he's in, right?
They checked the apartment,
When was the last time you saw him?
but no one answered. The place seemed deserted.
Hey, what's going on?
A neighbor noticed the police and told them she had seen Buss go out the back door.
He ran out of his apartment, jumped in his car with his headlights off, and he drove off at a high rate of speed and got away from us. We began a perimeter search trying to locate him, and we were not able to locate him.
A search of the apartment yielded no sign of the missing boy. APBs went out to law enforcement throughout the greater Chicago area with descriptions of Timothy Buss and his car.
Kankakee County Sheriff's Office, can I help you?
People began recognizing the sketch. A motel clerk in Braidwood, Illinois, called to say she thought Buss was staying there. Kankakee County sent Deputy Brady Bertrand to the motel in Braidwood, 25 miles south of Joliet.
At about 8 o'clock in the morning, Buss come out of the hotel and walked directly over to a dumpster in the parking lot of the hotel. He threw a pair of boots in the dumpster.
Deputy Bertrand radioed for assistance.
I'm just gonna stick with them. Need somebody to come back and put boots on the dumpster.
Then he followed the suspect.
He initially got on I-55 northbound, which leads into the city of Chicago, but he ended up getting off a short distance later and driving to Wilmington and pulling down by the river and talking to some fishermen down there.
Deputy Bertrand waited for backup to arrive. While he did, Kankakee County detectives Ron Kilman and Randy Hartman responded to the Braidwood Motel to collect the evidence.
The boots were retrieved. We're not sure what evidence that is going to be connected to, but he apparently put them there for a reason. So we secured them, whether there was possible blood located on them, hairs or fibers.
The boots were sent to the lab for analysis. The Kankakee officers hoped they could get Bus to talk.
Yeah.
He was very antsy and looking around as if he wanted to get away from there, but he had no place to go.
Every time something goes wrong, you guys are gonna start coming to me. Yeah, we are.
At first, the parolee was evasive, not wanting to talk.
And we'll get it worked out.
But eventually, he agreed to come to the Kankakee County Sheriff's Department for an interview.
This ain't right.
At the station, Bus denied knowing anything about Christopher Meyer. His lawyer arrived to discuss investigators' request for a consent to search Bus's car.
I didn't have anything.
Against the lawyer's advice, Bus signed the consent form.
I have nothing to hide. Nothing at all.
At the Sheriff's Department garage, Detectives Hartman and Kilman processed the suspect's car.
As a crime scene detective, we're basically putting a story together. And if you can do your job well enough, then you find that evidence that's able to tell you that story.
In the trunk, they discovered a car dent puller that appeared to have blood on it. There was also a tire iron and a tackle box like the one described by the boys who last saw Christopher. There was no fillet knife inside.
As we removed the items one at a time, then we were able to observe on the carpeting itself underneath the tools that there was a considerable amount of blood.
It was a difficult find, but an important one.
If in fact this was going to turn into a homicide, we needed to be able to put the boy and the suspect together.
Inside, the technicians also found a claw hammer.
It had dirt in the claw portion. What that told us was somebody's been doing some digging with this hammer.
On the passenger seat, the technicians recovered several head hairs. Like the other evidence, the hairs would be sent to forensics experts at the Illinois State Police Crime Lab. They had a suspect in custody and haunting evidence of foul play.
We still don't know where Chris is. We don't know if Chris is maybe hurt and bleeding. We were hoping we would find him stashed in a cabin or something along the river. So we never gave up hope that he would still be alive.
In 1995, Kankakee County, Illinois investigators were searching for 10-year-old Christopher Meyer, who was abducted while fishing. Evidence technicians found blood, hairs, and a dirt-encrusted hammer in the car of Timothy Bus, who had been seen with Christopher the day the boy disappeared.
Tim, they came in. Our investigations led us to believe that you have...
Authorities arrested Bus and charged him with aggravated kidnapping.
Every time a child missing, you come. You know this ain't right. You know this ain't right.
He refused to cooperate. At the Illinois State Police Forensics Lab, DNA research coordinator William Frank examined the evidence from Bus's trunk. He would compare the blood from those items to a DNA parentage profile created from Christopher's parents and to a probable sample of the boy's DNA called a convenience standard.
The convenience standard that was used was the child's asthma inhaler.
From the swabs of the inhaler and the parents' blood samples, Frank created a genetic profile using PCR testing.
The parentage comparison from the child's parents was consistent with the inhaler.
He then checked that profile against the blood from the car.
When I compared the profile that was identified in the asthma inhaler to the profile that was identified in the blood stains from the suspect's vehicle, the two profiles matched.
They still held out hope that the boy was alive. Kankakee County Sheriff Bernie Thompson.
After Timothy Bus was in custody, we were still looking for Christopher, and there was always that hope that we would find him alive.
A few days later, a search party that included Sheriff's investigator Kenneth Ponton discovered a pair of boys' briefs and later a fishing pole and part of a T-shirt.
We called Investigator Mulcahy and gave her the description of the items and asked her to check with the missing boy's mother, which she did, and the mother was able to identify that these items belonged to her son.
3 days later, in a part of Kankakee State Park, Will County deputies made the discovery that would finally end the search. Under a piece of plywood, partially buried, was the body of a small boy. He had been stabbed more than 50 times with a thin knife. It was Christopher. Evidence technicians collected a clump of dirt containing a boot print from the gravesite. They also collected samples of the soil in the area. Hair and fiber expert Ralph Meyer compared the hairs found in Timothy Buss's car to Christopher's using a comparison microscope.
We're looking at the general appearance, the length, the distribution of the pigmentation, the fusi throughout the shaft, ovoid bodies.
The hairs were microscopically consistent in every regard. Geologist Ken Knight examined the soil samples taken from the gravesite and the soil found on the claw hammer.
We tried to determine if the knowns and unknowns had the same characteristics, the same amount of crystals or mineral particles, same colors, same angularity of those particles, the same general type of botanical material.
Again, a match.
The fact that the soil from the hammer is consistent with a mixture of the soil samples from the gravesite indicates that the hammer was used to actually dig the grave.
Some of that soil held a partial impression of a boot print. Forensic scientist Robert Hunton compared boots Buss threw out at the motel to that impression.
I made a cast of that particular portion of the boot that had a similar pattern to the piece of soil. I compared those side by side. I was able to say that that impression could have been made by that portion, that small area of the right boot.
Investigators hoped more definitive proof would come from the DNA lab. William Frank checked samples from the victim's femur against the evidence he already had.
The genetic profile for the femur bone matches the genetic marker profile identified for the child's inhaler and also matches the bloodstains identified in the trunk from the suspect's car.
The forensic evidence proved that Timothy Buss abducted Christopher Meyer. He assaulted the boy, stabbed him repeatedly, then buried him in the woods. Buss was found guilty of kidnapping and murder and was sentenced to death. That sentence was commuted to life in January 2003, but this time there will be no chance of parole. Christopher's mother, Micah Moulton.
The anger and the sadness and the grief and all was so overwhelming, but I knew I could use it in a positive way to make a difference. I want laws changed. I helped in lobbying for the No Second Chances for Murderers, Rapists, and Child Molesters law, also known as Amy's Law.
That law, named for murdered college student Amy Willard, seeks to prevent the most violent criminals from being released on parole. It was passed by the U.S. Congress in 2000.